So, it's finally begun, the Dance of the Dragons. That's right, today on FraudOnTheTele, we're breaking down everything that happened in the House of the Dragons finale. Probably one of the most epic and visually stunning of any episode of House of the Dragon so far. An episode where Rhaenyra has a miscarriage, she also becomes queen, as well the first blood is spilt in the Dance of the Dragons. As always, if you enjoyed the video, we'll learn something new. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. This episode was crazy, so let's just get right into it, shall we? So the entirety of our episode focuses on Rhaenyra and those around her, taking place almost entirely on Dragonstone. And wow, can we just talk about how absolutely crazy Dragonstone as a set is. From inside the castle to the painted table, that crazy bridge scene that we've gotten so many times in this episode, as well as just the absolute beauty of the sky surrounding the island. Our episode begins not long after Aegon has been crowned king in King's Landing on Dragonstone. Rhaenyra and her allies still have no idea this is going on. That is until Princess Rhaenys, who, if you remember, fled on Dragonback from the coronation ceremony, having given up an opportunity, apparently, to kill all of the people that she's going to be fighting in the next coming episodes. More importantly, Princess Rhaenys informs Rhaenyra that her father is dead and her half-brother has usurped the throne. This throws Rhaenyra into quite the rage. Rhaenyra is pregnant right now with her daughter Visenya, I believe is the name. But this news of her father's death and this betrayal by Alicent and her brother sends her into a fury, one that sends her into labor. So first half of the episode was pretty rough as Rhaenyra is in this super painful premature labor the whole entire time, while the rest of her war council, Daemon, and all of her allies surrounded the painted table are trying to make decisions on this upcoming war. Now, there's a whole ton of metaphors and kind of imagery being played with here, in my opinion. The whole scene with all of the men sitting around the painted table discussing war, while meanwhile their queen, their rightful ruler, is in the background screaming because she's undergoing pain, and her husband Daemon seems to completely ignore it. Sometimes it's difficult with the showrunners and George R.R. Martin to try to figure out the message that's trying to be portrayed here, but this does feel like some kind of a woman's empowerment, feminine message going on, as Rhaenyra is the rightful queen, yet decisions are being made in her leave because she's currently preoccupied. What is this now, like the 4th pregnancy scene we've gotten in House of the Dragon in 10 episodes? It does feel pretty wild, and this one was
insanely graphic.
Yeah, I could have done without this specific graphic scene, in my opinion. Baby is ultimately born malformed and still and died in childbirth. But to me, really, this episode felt like a tale of two halves. There's pregnant Rhaenyra up until she gives birth to the stillborn baby and the baby dies. And then post that, her mindset seems to change. It's almost kind of akin to when Jon had to kill the boy inside of him to let the man live. Rhaenyra now, after the death of this baby and the grief that it's kind of put her through, as well as the loss of her father and the betrayal of her former friends and her brother, has really forced her into this position of queen. And you can really see a kind of change in her demeanor from the first half of the episode to the second half, 2/3. Rhaenyra and those around her attempt to begin to rally their allies, sending ravens to the bigger lords throughout Westeros. The lords that are up for grabs, that are needed to bring to their cause the most, are houses Stark, Tully, and Baratheon. All lords who have sworn fealty to Rhaenyra when she was younger, but whose current loyalty at the moment is a bit up in question. Her cause is not helped, though, because her brother, Aegon, has all of the symbols of legitimacy that one would need to lay claim to the throne. Besides being the son of the king and apparent naming of him upon the king's death, he also has the Conqueror's Blade, Aegon's Blade. He has the Conqueror's Crown. Rhaenyra, on the other hand, really doesn't have that many symbols of legitimacy. Besides being her father's daughter, looking like her father, she really has no symbols that bear her any legitimacy, which in situations like this, especially in Game of Thrones and Succession, matter a lot. That is until the arrival of Sir Steffon Darkland, one of the former Kingsguard who has made his way to Dragonstone to pledge fealty and loyalty to Rhaenyra, bringing with him the crown of King Jaehaerys. Rhaenyra and her allies attempt to figure out what is their plan of attack. Rhaenyra wanting to show restraint while Daemon and many of the other lords are looking for blood. Daemon specifically believes that they do not need a large host of swords as they have dragons. A whole lot of dragons, at least double the dragons of those on King's Landing. While Aemond does have Vhagar, currently the biggest dragon being ridden at the moment and one of the most powerful. In terms of sheer numbers, Rhaenyra's allies on Dragonstone have just way more dragons. As well, they have access to a number of dragon riderless dragons as well as eggs that are preparing to be hatched. Remember, dragons in a Game of Thrones are considered nukes, and in this situation, it's very obvious as to why. Rhaenyra's pushback is that she does not want to rule over a burnt to a crisp realm, as when dragons take flight in battle, little is left. As the Blacks are planning, they are interrupted as a Targaryen ship flying a green Targaryen banner has made its way to Dragonstone. This is Otto Hightower, who has been approved terms by Queen Alicent. Daemon wants to kill Otto and all of his men, as Daemon does. Rhaenyra mercifully, though, lets them leave, saying that she will reply to Alicent and the king's offer on the morrow. The next day, though, Corlys Velaryon arrives after talking with his wife, Princess Rhaenys. The man decides to declare for Rhaenyra, lending her the most powerful fleet in all of Westeros, as well as allowing them to choke off the Narrow Sea, which supplies King's Landing and much of Westeros. This is a huge win for the Blacks right off the bat before the battles have even started, as they can basically cut King's Landing off from any supplies, as well as a decent amount of Westeros in this area. This also brings with them a number of other dragon riders. Hooray! Fleet of House Velaryon behind them. Rhaenyra looks to push for more allies and remind those lords that they swore oath to her when she was named heir. She decides to send her sons Jace and Luke on Dragonback to treat with these lords. Jace going to the Riverlands as well as to the Winterfell, while Luke is to head to Storm's Inn to treat with Lord Baratheon. Now, if you've read Fire and Blood, this was one of the scenes that you have been waiting for the entire season, and was pretty obviously the scene that they were going to end season 1 on. To me, at least, this seemed pretty obvious, as this is one of the biggest events in Fire and Blood and kind of the catalyst for the ultimate fighting in Dance of the Dragons. So when Luke arrives in Storm's Inn, it is in fact stormy, and he is in fact not alone, as sitting on the wall of Storm's Inn is a massive freaking dragon, Vhagar. It seems Alicent has come prepared, already sending her son Aemond to treat with Lord Baratheon, and apparently they've made a deal, with Alicent offering a marriage pact to Lord Baratheon to secure his services, while Rhaenyra simply reminds the man of his debt, something that he doesn't seem to care too much about. Upon seeing Luke, Aemond gets pissed off because, you know, the whole one eye stuff and all of that, demanding that the boy take out his own eye as payment for taking his when they were children. Luke quickly leaves, trying to head back to Dragonstone as quickly as possible on his small little dragon, when out of nowhere in the sky, Aemond and Vhagar make an appearance. Now, this scene was absolutely epic and intense. Like I said, book fans have been waiting for this scene, the death of Luke and his dragon, you know, since House of the Dragon, the show, was announced. And the interesting thing about this scene is the little details that the showrunner added that were not in Fire and Blood, at least from my recollections. So according to Fire and Blood, Aemond and Vhagar kill Luke above the skies of Storm's End intentionally. But in the show, it's not nearly as simple as that. For whatever reason, Aemond is chasing Luke, maybe to scare the poor boy or to actually take his eye, but it doesn't seem like he had intent to kill him, because if he wanted to, he could have. I don't know. It's hard to know here, because in the book, it seems very much like his intent was to kill him. But in the show, it seems more like he's just trying to scare him, or like we said, he wants to take his eye. That is until Luke's dragon begins acting on its own accord, as we have to remember, these guys are still young children. They haven't been dragon riders for a super long time, in Aemon's case, a couple of years. But they haven't seen combat. They haven't had dragon versus dragon combat, well, let alone any combat on their dragons, and they're still young men, basically boys still. Luke's dragon goes rogue, attacking Vhagar, blowing fire in its face, which pisses the gigantic dragon off, causing it to go and attack Luke's dragon, killing both of them. As Aemond shouts, "No, Vhagar, no!" He tried to stop it. That's probably the most impactful moment of this entire episode. At the end of the day, Aemond, while a pretty cruel young man, is still just a boy. I don't even think the man's taken a life yet at this point, for as horrible, cruel, and evil he seems to portray himself. They're both still just children, inexperienced, and it's Aemond's lack of experience, knowledge, and ability that leads to Luke's death, which ultimately is the start for Dance of the Dragon. It's freaking great, man. That moment of realization when it crosses Aemond's face of, wow, this is, like, I did this. Like, he realizes in the moment the gravity of the situation, and he goes from this, cruel, scary swordsman with this massive dragon, the young boy knee-deep in not knowing what he's gotten himself into, that he really is. Our episode ends as Daemon tells Rhaenyra something that we can presume to be Luke's death, even though we don't exactly know how Daemon would know this, but irregardless, we can see the change on Rhaenyra's face, as the queen before, who would show restraint, now has nothing but fury in her eyes at the loss of her son. Rhaenyra was adamant that they would not be the first to shed blood in this war, and it was the acts of Aemond that basically caused the Dance of the Dragons, as he has become a kinslayer. Other little side note real quick, there's a scene where Daemon is in the dragon pits, or some kind of cave, I guess, singing to this dragon, one that we can presume is one of the untamed dragons that live on Dragonstone. Now, we're not exactly sure which dragon this is or what even is going on here. It seems like Daemon is trying to claim more dragons to the cause of his wife and his queen. My best guess, this dragon is the dragon Cannibal. We know very little about this dragon other than the fact that it was a dragon that lived on Dragonstone that did not have a rider, was a feral dragon, and it was called Cannibal for its proclivity to cannibalize other dragons. It was large and it was vicious. It's unknown if it was bigger than Vhagar, but this is my best guess as to who or what this dragon is. Interesting, something that I don't think was in Fire and Blood. I'm pretty sure Daemon didn't have two dragons from my recollection, but I'm down for some big dragon v big dragon combat, as it seems like this is maybe the route they want to take. Super epic episode, one I think befitting of a finale. The closing shot of Rhaenyra's face and just everything she's been through, especially from the start of this episode, as this episode really is a tale of two halves. You see a huge changing of Rhaenyra from the beginning of the episode to the end. Now, because of the death of her son and the death of her stillborn daughter, as well as the death of her father and the taking of her birthright, has made her into a hard, vindictive woman. One who at first showed restraint on causing destruction to the realm, who now seems hell-bent on getting revenge for her family and those who had betrayed her. I've called Season 1 of House of the Dragons the ultimate setup season for a reason, as the whole entire season is basically just set up context for the eventual Dance of the Dragons, the Civil War of the Targaryens, which I presume will be the next 2, possibly even 3 seasons. 10 weeks of shows just to wait a year or 2 to get the actual war, but I gotta say, this season was absolutely great. I'm gonna come out with a more in-depth review in the following week, but this show was absolutely fantastic. There was a couple of stumbles along the way, but overall I enjoyed almost all of Season 1 of House of the Dragon, except for really a couple of the overly graphic scenes. Besides that, the show was pretty good. The characters seemed pretty consistent, maybe minus Rhaenys a little bit. There was no crazy random teleporting. A lot of the problems in the end of Game of Thrones, the TV show, seem to be fixed and taken into account, as well the fact that Fire and Blood is not the most in-depth text ever, so the showrunners were given a good broad roadmap to where they could kind of fill in the gaps on character motivation and things like that, which were left out of Fire and Blood. Thoroughly enjoyed it. This episode was probably one of my favorites, minus the Rhaenyra birth scene. Could have lived without seeing that. While it was very powerful in its message, It was really gross and just unnecessary. Like we said before, some of the visuals in this episode were absolutely nuts. Dragonstone is easily the best set in all of Game of Thrones. Don't even at me. We're going to have to wait a whole another year before we get more Dance of the Dragon goodness, as now the war has finally begun. Very curious to see if we're going to get another time skip for the next season. But yeah, that's it for me, guys. Let me know your thoughts of the finale of House of the Dragon in the comments down below. Did you see the ending coming if you hadn't read the book? I know it surprised a lot of some of my friends who had no idea what was going on, while I'm sitting there laughing knowing all along that poor Luke about to get chomped on. As always, if you enjoyed the video and learned something new, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to check out some of our other House of the Dragons content, as well as our future House of the Dragon full Season 1 review, hopefully coming in the next week. And I hope to see you in the next one, guys. Stay safe out there. Peace, love, adieu.